All right, so we're going to start talking about programming now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over one of our primary tools. This is a programming machine that works for programming remotes and also keys, transponders, smart keys, etc. This is probably one of the most robust. Robust meaning it can be used on a lot of vehicles. Not all programming machines have all vehicles, right? There's just way too many different software that you would need to be able to program, all the cars that are out there. So we actually have multiple programmers, and this allows us to be able to hopefully service as many customers as possible by having a big selection of tools to use. So this is the primary one. This one is called Smart Pro. And how this works is there is a subscription fee for this. So we get charged every time we use this if we have something called a token system. So you can either purchase tokens that will allow you to program a car, but the token system is not that great just because if you mess up, you still get charged a token. And these tokens can range from $10 to $40 depending on how many you buy at one time. I basically have the unlimited version, so we can do as many as we want, even if we mess up, for up to a year. So every time that we end a year, we would have to renew this, and it's pretty expensive. So we want to make sure that we're breaking even by doing as many as we can per year. So anyways, what I want to do is I want to show you how this Smart Pro works. It's called Smart Pro. And it's by a company called Advanced Diagnostics. And I believe they're in the UK. They're a pretty big company. And I would say by far, this is one of the best programming machines that are out there right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the features. I'm going to back it up a little bit just so you can see the entire machine itself. It's rugged. There's handles in the back that you can grip onto. And then there's also a little stand, and this stand is not supposed to be used to put on a steering wheel like that or anything like that. Usually we just put it on our laps when we're programming. But that is the Smart Pro programming device. And I'll show you the features in this. You're going to be using this quite often when you're programming remotes and also keys. Okay, so the stuff on the bottom, you don't have to worry too much, but I'll quickly go over it. Settings, these are just settings on the machine itself. It's pretty much already set up. It is connected to Wi-Fi. You need Wi-Fi to be able to do updates because the Advanced Diagnostics is always coming out with new software or updates. So we need to make sure that we're always updating and staying current. So that's updates. You'll see like a little number pop up in this corner, right corner. It'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many updates there are. Smart Pro. So this is the pay-as-you-go system. What I mentioned was there are tokens that you can purchase. To buy tokens, you actually have to have a wholesaler that sells it. Most of the wholesalers that we have for our keys, they sell the token plan, and you connect it to your system, and they do it on their end. We have the unlimited token plan. It is active all the way till January 4th of 2021. Once that day hits, this becomes inactive and we can't use it anymore unless we purchase the unlimited plan or the pay-as-you-go plan as well. Another option is you can actually purchase different brands and their software outright, meaning you don't have to have a token system. You just buy the software upright, but it's very expensive and usually not very advisable, especially in our situation. Okay, so previous vehicles, these are vehicles that we've done before. You could tell we've done quite a few cars. Transponder, don't need to worry about that. OBD stands for onboard diagnostics. This allows you to be able to plug into the car's computer system. That allows you to be able to do different things, pull up fault codes, etc. We don't really use that. So the most important thing that we're going to be doing is using vehicle selection. So, big note, filtered. We only filter and look for USA, USA, Canada. Those are our biggest ones. You don't need the other ones because we don't have, vehicles. It's not brand like, oh, if we don't select this, is Honda going to pop up? What it means is Japan has different software than the US does. So all we're looking for is USA, USA, Canada vehicles. So that's the filter. You could do a list as well to look at it, but really I just use the grid format, and it's just easier to see. Okay, so how this works is there is a OBD port right here. I'm going to zoom out. Oh. Okay, right here. This is an OBD port, and what you do is you need to plug this into the car's OBD port. I remember in the very beginning that this was, a little daunting because I was like, man, how do I find this thing on the vehicle? So OBD ports are basically, most of them are located underneath the steering column of the driver's side of the car. And they say it's the female end of the adapter. So you just stick this in and it connects. Once it's connected, you can go ahead and now follow the prompts on this to program a vehicle. We're going to have a ton of examples. I just want to do an overview of the Smart Pro itself so you feel comfortable, sort of using it. Up here, it just shows you your tokens. Obviously here we have unlimited, so it doesn't matter. Once this is connected, this is our Wi-Fi. I don't know what that warning thing is. But this is our battery. So this thing always needs to be plugged in unless you're working on a car. I would say the battery lasts for about an hour. After that, it's going to die and it takes some time to charge up. So you always have to make sure this thing is plugged in if you're not using it. So that right here shows once you connect this to the OBD port to the actual vehicle, it will be able to tell the voltage of the battery. And normally you want to have this voltage up at least to like 10, 11 to 12 range for this to program properly. It's not that often this happens. Usually if a vehicle is like dead and you need it to be at a certain battery level for you to be able to program properly. And so what you need to do is you can actually use a jumper cable to attach, or a charging cable and box that'll allow you to charge the battery as you're working on it. That should raise that up to like a 12 voltage. Okay, so next what we're gonna do is I'll just give you an example of how this works. So let's say you have, the same thing, same example, 2011 Honda CR-Z. We go to Honda. All we do is we look for it. It goes region, USA. We're gonna look at model, start of the year, end of the year production, key type, fuel, engine, chassis. You don't really need this much. It's really this side that you're looking at. So what I do is I look up CR-Z. You could type it in. Oh, there is a dash here. Okay, so there it is. That's the programming that I want. So what I do is I click on this. This shows up. Okay, so anytime you select anything here, Honda, we're on the CR-Z. This is the interface that you're going to see on this. Okay, so every single one. Let me go over it quickly. You don't need to know everything here, but this just gives you information on the vehicle. Like fuel, gearbox. You don't really need to do this, know it with programming. But this is important information. So vehicle information, program transponder, yes. So this machine programs the transponder. Programming the remote is automatic because the key and the remote, it's a key combo. So it's together and it programs together. There's some instances where it doesn't, and that's going to be with ILCO keys, the aftermarket keys. Sometimes, even though this one says it programs both at the same time, sometimes it doesn't. And it requires a separate manual programming with the other ILCO aftermarket keys. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes it doesn't. So if it doesn't program, that's a possibility of why it's not working. PIN code required? No. So PIN codes, sometimes you need PIN codes to be able to get access to the car. So it's a safety feature. So most cars, the owner's manual will have some sort of PIN code in it that allows you to be able to get in. It's not always like that, and I rarely can find the PIN code on the owner's manual because most people lose it. But most of the time, if a PIN code is required, this machine will automatically pull the pin. I would say 80% of the time it does. 20% of the times that it doesn't, you have to use the other tools that we have at our disposal, which is the Vinlocks, and also the other app that we have. I forgot the name of it. So many things start with like auto something. Autocode. So Autocode is another place that we would need to get the pin. Last place, of course, is NASTIF and all the OEMs that are connected to them. So in this case, if there was a PIN code that was required, you would go to the Honda Tech website that we have and find it that way. And that's in this section where we talked about NASTIF. So if you're not familiar with that, go back to that. Pre-coded key. Pre-coded keys are typically European cars that need to be pre-coded. I'm not too familiar with them just because we don't do European cars, at least a decent portion of them. Let's see, transponder type, that's the chip type that's required. Add key, working key required. Sometimes a working key is required to be able to program a vehicle. In this instance, you don't need one. You can, all keys lost, you can program a key still. Smart Pro information. This is just Smart Pro's, their immobilizer software. This is sort of irrelevant to us. Immobilizer tokens. This is how many tokens it would take to program this vehicle if we had tokens, but we have the unlimited version. Key information. This just gives you info on the key. So from ILCO, because Advanced Diagnostics was bought out by ILCO, so that's why they promote all their stuff here. The HO03PT is the key with the chip that would be required for this. This is the it's an OEM one. Let's see, transponder cloning. So this is if you want to clone. We don't really use that, so you don't have to worry about that too much. And key cloning. That is the one you would need, HON 66MH. It's also from Silca. All these are from Silca. I don't really deal with this too much. So just know that that's some information that you can go over. Sometimes there's photos here that help, show you where the OBD port is, or just more information on the vehicle, maybe what the key looks like. It's helpful. I always go through it just to check. Tips and hints. This is actually really important. There's sometimes vehicles that have these weird nuances to it. And most of the time, Smart Pro will have some sort of notes on it, and you want to be able to look here before you're programming a vehicle, just because there might be some weird thing about it. And this will be where they write it down. This will also tell you sometimes if it's like, it requires a bypass of like 10 minutes to get into the system. So like Chevy, I think Ford, some of them have it where it requires 10 to 12 minutes for this thing to be plugged into the OBD port and starting the programming process for you to even get into program a key. It's also a security feature. Not all cars, most cars you can get in right away, start programming. This is information on the remote itself. Remote coded at the same time as transponders. This is basically saying when you program the immobilizer, the remote will be programmed at the same time. You'll notice on this side right here, most of the time if it says immobilizer, it'll also say remote right here too, so you can program the remote if it's a separate thing. But in this instance, the immobilizer and the key remote are programmed at the same time. You don't really deal with the service light reset. But vehicle info, photos, tips and hints, remote. that is the general overview of any of all the keys or all the cars that you're going to do will have the same interface. Information will be slightly different, but this is your place where you check out information about the vehicle itself and the key and the remote. So how we get started, we will have a bunch of examples on how to program. Since this is not hooked up to a vehicle right now, you're not going to see the entire process. But basically, you would bring this out to the vehicle, you would plug this into the OBD port. We'll have some information about OBD ports. It's usually really easy to find. They all look the same. Occasionally, you need a different cord for certain vehicles. Like newer vehicles, sometimes it requires a different cord. And this system usually tells you when that's the case. Or you have to look it up online. Google is your best friend, and YouTube. So here, once you have this plugged into the OBD port, you go ahead, you click connect. It says loading. Sometimes it'll tell you to switch the ignition on. You switch it on, not to start the car, but just to the on position where the lights and everything on the inside turn on and you can hear your radio. Once you do that, you press OK, and it'll basically go to the next screen, which shows that it is now in the computer of the car and we can start the programming process. Not going to show that right now. We will have a bunch of examples on it. This is just to go with an overview of the Smart Pro itself. Aside from that, that's the machine that will be used quite often. This is the one that we use the most. Remote, sometimes if you're doing like older cars that have like a standalone remote, this will work. But it's good. 70% of the times it'll work. The other times we use another machine for programming the remotes. So that's an overview of the Smart Pro. Get really familiar with this. You're going to use this quite often. Just remember, this is not always 100%. It can mess up, and that can be really frustrating. But just keep in mind that most of the times it will work, and it's pretty straightforward. It's one of the easiest machines to use because everything's in like plain English. It's step-by-step instructions for the most part. Another thing to keep in mind, this is by vehicle. So when it shows up, let me see. Yeah, so I just went back. This is programming by vehicle. So there might be instances where it's actually required that you get something more specific to use on a vehicle. It's pretty rare, but it happens. You press here. This gives you a bunch of different types of options. Really what it is they just categorize all this into the models, so it's just easier for us to reference. So, you do the Honda Accord, but really what's happening is that one of these type 10 is the same thing that's going to be used in the actual, like this one. They just make it easier for us to reference because, when you're looking at it, you're like, I don't know, type 10, does it work on a 1998 Honda Accord? You don't know. So that's why this system makes it really easy to program. But, this can overlap. A 1998 Honda Accord can overlap with a 2002 Honda Civic, for example. And it's the same type 10. But here, they just make it easier for us to be able to reference. Any other thing that is relevant on this machine? Programming. This is to go back into the programming machine. One thing that you'll find out once we actually do the programming is a way to disconnect. So there'll be a button up here to disconnect, and you always have to disconnect this before you pull out the OBD port from the vehicle, or it can stall the programming. And you have to reset this whole thing and start over, and it could just mess things up, so don't do that. Aside from that, that is the Smart Pro, and get used to this. This will be your best friend.